Good morning. Hello and welcome to today's Wyoming Community Navigator Program webinar. We're so glad that you have joined us today for Business Classifications Demystified, presented by both Bridget Manley and Daniel Patterson. My name is Mandy Bailey, and I'm the Education and Advising Director for the Wyoming Community Navigator Program. I'm going to be working behind the scenes today to help with any technical difficulties we may encounter, which hopefully there will be none. So the Wyoming Community Navigator Program is funded by the U.S. Small Business Administration and utilizes the Wyoming Entrepreneurial Support Network to reduce barriers that all small businesses often face, including those owned by groups such as veterans, women, and those from rural communities and communities of color. The Wyoming Community Navigator Program uses a hub and spoke model to pursue its goals. Through their collective efforts, the hub and spokes provide training, mentorship, access to capital, and access to other resources to help business owners build resiliency and ultimately be the driving force behind Wyoming's economic recovery. So today's webinar, Business Classifications Demystified, is presented by both Bridget Manley and Daniel Patterson. Bridget is an e-learning specialist with a passion for helping learners become effective agents in their careers and in their communities. She co-founded Ascended Design and Training with her husband, Daniel Patterson, in July of 2020. And before that, she was a curriculum manager for a Denver-based startup company where she developed compliance and manufacturing training for state legal cannabis industry. And Daniel is a software systems developer with over 30 years of multidisciplinary experience in software, electronic, and mechanical design. And he has been heavily involved in several different industries, including logistics, gaming, music, and heavy equipment, just to name a few. So we are so excited to have both Daniel and Bridget here with us today. And without further ado, I will turn it over to you guys.
Excellent. Thank you, Mandy. We appreciate that. I'll just get our slideshow up and running here. Okay. You should be able to see my slide deck at this point. Thank you all for coming to this today. We're really excited to share what we've learned just over the past couple of years about running a business, specifically about getting your business up and off the ground. So our goal today is hopefully to take some of the mystification out of different types of business classifications so you can decide which one is right for you. I'm going to just make the chat panel visible. I would like to kind of make this more of a discussion rather than me lecturing you for 40 minutes. So feel free to jump into the chat and ask questions, share ideas. All of that is welcome so we can kind of learn from each other today. So just a little bit more about us. As mentioned before, my name is Bridget Manley. I'm Vice President and Chief Learning Officer of Ascendant Design and Training. For folks who maybe can't see the screen today, I'm a white woman in late 30s with dark brown hair and a blunt bob and bangs and wire-rimmed glasses. Like most business owners, I wear a lot of hats. So I'm a learning experience designer. I develop e-learning modules, and I'm also an adult learning consultant, which means I draw on my background in teaching, journalism, and instructional design to provide recommendations and guidance for our clients and customers. I kind of run the services side of the house, and I work a lot mainly with businesses that are looking to train employees. Daniel is also a vice president, and he's the chief technical officer. He runs the product side of the house. So he's developing software tools for people like me to basically provide better learning experiences by having a wider range of design tools. We work together. We're a husband and wife team. And for this particular webinar, I'm going to be in charge of running the slideshow and doing kind of like the main content. And then at the end, Daniel will jump in to answer any questions you might have. He's kind of a serial entrepreneurial, so he has a lot of background and experience with starting different types of businesses. So let's talk a little bit about what you'll be able to do at the end of this session today. On the screen, I have 4 circles. From left to right, they have a Venn diagram, a pair of scales, a profile of somebody's head with gears turning inside of it, and a couple of chat bubbles. And this is kind of representing some of the things we'll hope you'll be able to do by the end of this webinar, as well as things we'll do actually in the webinar itself. So from left to right, first, we want to help you be able to differentiate between different business types. We also want to help you weigh the pros and cons of each one so you can decide which one is best for you. Finally, as mentioned before, we encourage you to interact with us and with other attendees through the chat. Again, you're free to post comments, questions that are relevant, to this particular topic. Again, we kind of like to have this be more of a conversation. So with that, we're going to actually start with a discussion question. Just so we can kind of gauge where you're at. If you're comfortable sharing this, please drop in the chat where you are right now in your business journey. Maybe you're thinking about starting a business, but haven't actually taken steps toward that, which is fine. Maybe you're in the process of forming a business, or maybe you already have a business, but you're thinking about restructuring, or maybe you're somewhere else. If you feel comfortable, go ahead and drop that in the chat, please. And I'll give you just a couple minutes or a couple seconds to think about that and respond. Well, we're waiting for those to trickle in. Just to give you a little background, I know that when we started our business together, I had no experience. I had very little experience, actually. I was a sole proprietor, freelancer before that, and starting a business to me was super scary. But fortunately, it hasn't been nearly as nerve-wracking as I thought it would be. And that's some of the ideas that we're going to share today. Okay, so we have one participant who says, beginning stages of market research and determining where to start my business, or if I should take over one already established. That's a good question, right? Sometimes it's easier to start on your own, and sometimes it's easier to take over one that's already ready. That's a good question. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, let's see. In the Q&A, one of our participants said the chat is disabled. So Mandy, if you wouldn't mind seeing if you can maybe enable the chat for him, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, so if you have any more stories that you'd like to share in terms of where you're at in your business, feel free to drop those in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next slide here. We wanted to kind of start with kind of a basic pep talk. If you're thinking of starting a business, here are some things you can think about to kind of get you on that road. Now, if you already have a business, some of this might be, kind of familiar to you, but I think you'll still get value out of this section. So you may be thinking about starting a business and it might seem kind of scary. We're here to tell you that there might be some difficult steps, but it's totally doable. So let's start with this concept of bootstrapping. In this context, it means using your own funding and driving your own startup from what you have personally available at the moment. This is contrasted with, saying like, getting public funding, getting investors, getting a loan. Bootstrapping is when you just start with what you've got. I'm just going to quantify this or qualify this a little bit. Sometimes bootstrapping is kind of meant to say, you don't need help, you can do it on your own. And that's not necessarily true. When you're starting a business, you definitely want to ask for help and get support. But in this particular context, we're just kind of talking more the financial side. Like, you don't need to necessarily get a loan. You don't need to necessarily have investors. You can start with what you have and what you know today. With that, even if you are bootstrapping, starting a business is a completely attainable goal. No matter what type of business you choose, you can still end up concentrating mostly on what you're good at. So that's the service you provide or the product that you're making. There are certainly rules and guidelines for running a business that you want to study and be aware of, but you don't need to hire anyone else to make your business official. You can just start, and if you say you own a business, you own a business. One thing that's been helpful for us has been the concept of small reversible bets. And this comes from Reid Hoffman in the book, The Startup of You. And this concept means instead of betting the whole farm, putting it all on the line, you start with one small bet that if it doesn't work out, you haven't lost a lot, but you try one small thing, you see what happens. And if it's good, you keep going. This is a really great way to incrementally get into your business. And so you're not absorbing a whole bunch of risk at once. You can kind of take it at your own pace. Similar to that, another thing that we found helpful is the iterative approach or the incremental ideal. And this comes from software development, where instead of trying to get everything perfect to start with, you start with what's called an MVP, a minimum viable product. And once you have that up and going, then you can start iterating or start making incremental changes to it. And it's the same thing with your business. You can start, say, like as a sole proprietor or as a partnership, start small. And then as you continue to grow, maybe you want to restructure as an LLC, as a corporation. You can totally do that. The most important thing is to get started rather than trying to get everything perfect to start. Along with that, it's important to remember to, find the pace that works right for you. You can start right away, especially if you have a good idea for a product or service. If you do feel like you have something marketable, don't let the obstacles of filing paperwork or filing with the state, don't let that get in the way of running your business or starting your business. The final thing that we would kind of recommend is to focus on the long term. At least from what we've experienced, starting a business is kind of like a marriage, where to make it official, you're focused on like the wedding, like the flowers and the arrangements and stuff like that. But ultimately, the important thing is the marriage itself. And it's the same thing with the business. There's some things you have to do up front to get it running. But ultimately, the important thing is the value that you plan to bring to your community, to your customers. And it's the small things you do every day that are going to determine whether or not you're successful. So certainly take your time and be diligent about filing, but don't make it all about getting it set up. Okay. So just to pause and look at the chat, we have another comment here. It says we have two companies, one a C Corp, and the other an LLC. We are needing to set up another in an international partner and want to make sure we have the correct designation. Perfect. Okay. At the end here, when we get to the Q&A, Daniel might have some thoughts for you on that.
Bridget, we have one more who is starting a new business. They're mid-product development and also a 307 Impact Sweetwater finalist.
Cool. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I hear that 307 Impact is doing great things. So that's awesome. Excellent. Okay, so when we're talking about what kind of business designation to choose, two main factors you want to consider right away are litigation and taxation. So litigation is just a fancy word of saying who is legally responsible when something goes wrong. Can you be sued personally, or is it going to be the corporation or the business that will be sued? And we'll talk about this more in just a few minutes. The second factor is taxation. What kind of forms do you need to fill out? What kind of taxation data do you need to track and report? This will vary depending on what kind of business you have. So one more thing before we dive into the business classifications. Two things that we've found to be helpful with just basically running a business. And for many of you, this might be, kind of a recap. One is to keep very good financial records, including tracking all your income and expenses. And secondly is just, always do your research. There's always something to learn, right? So seek out reliable information sources whenever possible. One really good source is the Wyoming Secretary of State website. They have a lot of really good documentation on starting and running a business in Wyoming. Another one I would recommend is the Go Wild databases. These are provided by the Wyoming State Library, and they're free to anybody with a library card in any library in the state. They have a whole section in there on databases just for running a business. You can find articles and resources on writing a business plan and managing a business, all kinds of good stuff in there. And again, that's totally free. Okay, so here are the general business types that we're going to discuss today. On the screen, I have a series of small circles, each one representing a different business type. From left to right, these are sole proprietorship, partnership, limited liability or LLC, closed corporation, S corporation, corporation, and nonprofit or 501c3. Now, of course, these are only a sampling. There are more classifications than this, but these are kind of the main ones. These are the ones that people usually use. In this presentation, we'll focus on differentiating these different types based on banking requirements, legal liability, the difficulty of each one to launch and maintain, the respect level or public perception of each one, and the IRS taxes and fees. Now, in the chat, we have a PDF handout, and that will provide more information about each type, including ownership structure, share types, and directors. So go ahead and download that so you have that as a future reference. If there's one particular business type that really interests you, you can use that handout to kind of drill down more into that particular type. So one question that people often have when starting a business is, isn't that expensive? Not typically, especially in Wyoming. So don't let the cost scare you. In Wyoming, the state fees for starting a business can range from $0 to $100. Now, keep in mind that there might be additional fees and licenses depending on the type of business you're running. So if you're doing any sort of food handling, food prep, you might have additional fees or licensure through the health department, for instance. It's good to keep in mind that there are no federal fees for starting a business. And if you're really kind of worried about, making sure everything's right or, the costs, you can actually hire someone to help you file those business papers for you. You can do everything from LegalZoom. They can do business filings for $79 plus filing fees. Taylor Brands, if you want to go a little bit more boutique, they're about $300 plus filing fees. And if you really want to get specific, you can hire an individual business lawyer, which typically runs between $1,000 to $1,500. But if you feel confident that you can file all the fees or file the paperwork on yourself or file the paperwork yourself, you can save money in that area and just file them yourself for free. So while we're on the subject of fees, let's talk about the fees for starting a business in Wyoming. In these and following slides, we're going to have some charts that just visually represent the differences in each of these concepts or each of these categories as they apply to these different business types. So as you can see on the slide, we have a graph with, on the left, we have numbers from 0 to 120 representing the cost. And then on the bottom, we have the different business types: sole proprietorship, partnership, LLC, corporations, and nonprofit corporations. So if you're starting as a sole proprietor or a partnership, technically it's free, but if you want a DBA or doing business as, you're looking at $100. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. If you're an LLC or any other type of corporation, your filing fees for the state will be $100. And if you're looking to start a nonprofit, that's $50. So the state does give you a little bit of a break if you're starting a nonprofit. Okay, and then banking, going back to that DBA, you may already be familiar with this, but for those who aren't, just a quick recap, a doing business as is basically just an official business name that you can collect money under. Now, unfortunately for sole proprietors or partnerships, before opening a business account, the bank will need to see a state-approved business name registration. Now, any other company type, if you file with the state, you already have that official designation. All they need to see at that point is basically the paperwork that you filed with the state showing that the state has approved your business. So let's talk next about liability. On the slide here, we have a chart with numbers from 0 to 4.5. These aren't tied to any external measure. They're basically just subjective, just to, again, visually illustrate the differences in liability. Now, if you're a sole proprietor or a partnership, you're going to be exposed to a lot more liability than any other business type. Liability is sometimes known as personal exposure, and it kind of means exactly what it sounds like. So, say like if you're a sole proprietor and someone wants to, hold you legally liable for something, they can come after your personal assets. Same thing with the partnership. But if you're any other type of business on this chart, then, they can try to come after your personal assets, but more often than not, they'll only be able to get to the assets held by the company. So anything from an LLC above gives you a little bit more protection and a buffer, like legal wise, than it would be just running it as a sole proprietor or as a partnership. Okay, I'm just gonna make sure, see if we have any questions or thoughts in the chat. Okay, doesn't look like it. All right, so just a little bit about difficulty. This refers to the difficulty both when forming the company and maintaining its ongoing records. So again, we have a chart on the slide with numbers 0 to 6. Again, these are subjective numbers, not tied to any external measurement. And as you can see, sole proprietors are very easy to start. There's not a whole lot of paperwork to file or maintain. And then it goes up in difficulty there from partnership, LLC, and then closed corporation. So your closed corporation, S corporation, and general corporation, those are about the same level of difficulty, you know, or medium difficulty. If you're doing a nonprofit, you're going to be looking at a significantly more difficulty. That's just because the state holds you to a little bit of a higher standard. And kind of the takeaway from this is that the more complex structure you expect from your organization, the more difficult it's going to be to start and maintain. So let's talk a little bit about respect level. This kind of goes back to public perception. Just to preface this by saying that, you know, if you're out there running a business, you deserve respect no matter what, right? This is talking more about how people might fairly or unfairly perceive the status of your business. So as you can see on the chart here, sole proprietorships have the lowest amount of public perception typically of any of the other, you know, business types. And that's not to say that they aren't legitimate businesses, because they are. They make up about 73% of all businesses in the US. But unfortunately, they don't always receive the same amount of respect as other types of organizations, specifically if they're working with other businesses. I'm going to pause just for a second to answer a question in the chat. It says, I have been a business for 25 years and have a sales tax number. Never paid any fees to state for business. Should I check on this? Daniel, could you respond to that, please?
Yeah, I would just say that if you are selling products that you are collecting tax on, or there are some services like what is that called? The hospitality services that they charge sales tax on. If you're doing any kind of activities like that, then you definitely should check up on that and try to get caught up immediately. But if you're only providing services, for example, consultation or something where you're not selling a product, then basically you don't need to worry about that. If you're a sole proprietor, you don't need to repair shop for stringed instruments. Yeah, so do you typically charge on any kind of product sales or anything like that? Or is it repair bill only? Some retail. Okay, so yeah, I would try to get that under control. And if you still have records for well, let's just say, have you charged sales tax on the retail that you transactions that you've made? Okay, so yeah, that would probably require a fair amount of work to go back to your original records as far back as you can go and try to add up the amount of sales tax that you've collected on, and then if it's possible to you know, get in touch with the state, and they may be able to work out some kind of payment plan with you where you can begin to pay some of those sales taxes to them. But I'm not completely aware. Oh, okay. So he says, the person says, I have always charged tax since the beginning. So in that case, you do need to send that money to the state. That's taxes that are due to the state. So, oh, you do already. So you've never. Okay, I'm just going to read your question back again. It says, I have been a business for 25 years and have a sales tax number, never paid any fees to the state for business. Should I check on this? So does that indicate that you are a sole proprietor? Yes. Okay. Yeah. So no, everything is fine as long as you're sending in your sales tax. And I apologize. I thought I was under the impression from your original question that you weren't sending in any sales tax. Okay. So sorry about that.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, thank you for that question. Yeah. And thank you for answering that, Dan. Yeah, sometimes with fees and sales tax, it can get just a little bit, it can get a little bit confusing. Yeah. So thank you for asking that. I'm glad, and hopefully that was able, to help you a little bit. Okay, so we're gonna continue on here, kind of following with the concept of public perception. We have just some guidelines and recommendations for sole proprietors. I was a sole proprietor for several years before we started Ascendant Design and Training. Sole proprietors, if you're offering services, are sometimes known as freelancers. And it's a great way to make a living. It's a great way to be out in the world, but especially if you're doing business with other businesses, if you're doing like business to business kinds of services, it's really important to stand your ground against organizations who would try to make you the dreaded employee without benefits. And this is when, basically the company is dictating to you how much they're going to pay you, what hours you have to work, what stand-up meetings you do and do not have to attend, but they're not paying your health insurance. They're not providing any help with your dental or vision. You're paying that all out of pocket. You want to avoid becoming an employee without benefits at all costs. So here are some recommendations for doing that. The first one is to always take charge of setting your own terms, contracts, deliverable dates, and pricing. For myself, it's always helpful to remember that I am a vendor rather than an employee. So I am another business doing business with this company. It's fine to negotiate to find something that's going to work for everybody. But at the end of the day, you are the ultimate decision maker for your company, not the customer. Similarly, the customer doesn't decide the due date, you do, nor do they dictate the price. They tell you what they need, and then you quote them a price, and then it's up to them to decide whether or not that's going to fit with their, basically with their budget or their business plan. The other thing to keep in mind is by law, the customer can't insist that you follow their policies, procedures, or schedules. Other than reporting the progress and status of the project that you're doing for them, you're not required to be supervised by their supervisors or answer to any department managers or go to stand-up meetings or anything like that. So the final just kind of wrap up on this is to remember to stay strong and hold your own, keep those very healthy boundaries, which protect both you and your client. And if you can do that, then you'll have a much more successful business. You'll be less stressed. Hopefully you won't hate your life at the end of the day. And you'll be able to provide really good services to your clients. Okay, so let's talk about taxes, everybody's favorite subject, right? Just a few notes about taxes. In small organizations, owners will typically pay normal income taxes in addition to self-employment tax for the amount earned. So one of the kind of disadvantages of running your own business, especially in a small organization, is that you will pay more taxes. So in these particular cases, the business will generally file a set of forms to report income and distribution. Just a reminder, everyone in the US is responsible for paying their taxes either annually or quarterly. I know, basically of some sole proprietors or small business owners who like to pay their taxes quarterly. Instead of having all their money for taxes set aside in an account where they feel tempted to dip into it, they pay it quarterly. So they make sure that that money is going to the IRS on a steady pace. Again, this is totally up to you in, and how you choose to have that paid, whether annually or quarterly, but just keep that part in mind. If filing your own taxes seems really hairy, scary, and you don't want to deal with it, you can always hire a tax prep service. Otherwise, all the forms you need to file your taxes are available online. They have complete step-by-step instructions, and they have cross-references to all the related forms you might need. Kind of the bottom line is that the IRS likes to get paid. So they want to make it easy for you to pay your taxes relatively, or at least to find those particular forms. And they're usually pretty good about that. The final note here, we would strongly recommend using electronic filing whenever possible. This just eliminates human error when it comes to, stuff accidentally, like forms accidentally getting lost, or, input error, people accidentally typing in the wrong number. Electronic filing is a good way to avoid that. Just to remember that federal taxes can be complicated and IRS agents can sometimes make mistakes. So just a few notes on taxes there.
I just wanted to inject right there, Bridget, that even though IRS agents can be known to make mistakes, you're not really allowed to bring that up to them. And at this point in history, it's almost impossible to contact the IRS over anything. So you want to try to avoid any possible problems if you can to begin with.
Yes, definitely. Good point. Make life easy for everyone, especially yourself. So, okay. So let's talk just a little bit about state fees. In most cases, a state registered company in Wyoming will only need to pay a small annual fee of $60 to stay in business and stay registered. But again, keep in mind that you may be required to file quarterly sales and use tax returns or pay for specialized permits. Usually this is done, or at least, like the annual filing, that annual fee usually comes when you file what's called, I think it's an annual report with the state. They'll send you an email to remind you like, hey, this is coming up. And it's pretty simple. I think it's like 3 or 4 pages, very easy to fill out. Okay. So just to kind of wrap it up and kind of put a bow on it, here are some recommendations we would have for people who are just starting a business. The first one is if this is your first business and you want to run it completely by yourself, consider starting as a sole proprietor. If you, say your business grows and you want to hire more people or expand the business, you can always make structural changes. You can come back later and make it an LLC or something else if that seems to be a good fit. Otherwise, if you're thinking about starting a business and you want to say hire employees or bring on a partner, we would recommend starting as an LLC first and then scaling up, simply because you have more of that public perception, you have more liability coverage, you have less less personal exposure, those kinds of things. So just to kind of compare those two again, for starting a sole proprietorship, it's $0 cost to start. And for an LLC, it's $100 to file with the state. If you do want a DBA as a sole proprietor, you will pay $100, but that's already included if you get an LLC. A sole proprietorship by definition is only one person, whereas an LLC can be one or more. Again, your liability will be higher with a sole proprietorship and lower with an LLC. The difficulty in paperwork will be very low with a sole proprietor. There's really not much to file. If you're an LLC, you will need to file more paperwork, basically like a business description and who are the owners and that kind of thing. But it really doesn't take too long. I think Daniel and I did ours in like a week. It was pretty simple. And then just in terms of respect level, just remember, if you're a sole proprietor, you still deserve respect. So make sure that you maintain those strong boundaries with, with your clients and your customers. If you're an LLC though, having those 3 letters behind your name adds a lot of perception, a lot of credibility. So that's something to keep in mind as well if you're starting your own business. Okay, so I know that we've covered quite a bit of ground today. On the screen, I have a question you can answer if you feel comfortable. Based on what you've learned today, which business type do you think is right for you? If you feel comfortable sharing that in the chat, go ahead and drop that in. Otherwise, feel free to drop in any questions or comments you might have that we might be able to answer for you today. Okay. One person says probably an LLC. And then going back to that question earlier, international partners. Daniel, I'm going to go ahead and punt that one over to you.
Okay, yeah. As far as the question of whether to form the new company as an LLC or a C Corp, a lot of that, well, first of all, you're allowed to have foreign partners in either one of those types of business. So looking at it from the US perspective, if you happen to have an LLC and you bring in foreign partners, and in certain countries, if you operate, as a foreign country in that country, an LLC would still be fine. But I wouldn't rule out the situation that depending on what other country your partners are in, that they might not consider an LLC to be an actual organization. Whereas if you file with a C Corp with foreign shareholders, that particular type of country or company will be recognized in just about every other modern country. So it seems like it would be standard if you're definitely going to be participating in international business, that you would form like a fully qualified C corporation with foreign shareholders and just go ahead and do, the extra shareholder meetings and the board of director meetings and keeping all of your minutes official, and the extra work that's required to keep your C Corp in order, because then at that point, the world is your oyster, basically.
So it's kind of like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Daniel, but it kind of sounds like it's a difference between like a sole proprietor and an LLC, where, one is a little bit easier to start, but if you put in a little extra time and willing to, do a little bit more, you can get a corporation that's going to be really well suited towards what you're doing, right?
Yeah, well, basically the C Corp is unlimited in every dimension. You can grow it to be hundreds of thousands of members and have all different types of purposes and all different types of departments. Whereas with an LLC, it's really meant to be a limited membership, and it's actually kind of inconvenient to change your membership. So like if you're going to have a lot of shareholders, or if you're going to have an increasing number of shareholders, it's actually worth it to go through the extra administration steps to maintain a C corporation.
Right. Okay. And just to clarify, C corporation would just be, what we refer to in this deck as just a corporation.
Yeah,
right?
just right. Yeah, commercial corporation.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, well, yeah, I hope that was helpful. If you have any more questions about working with international partners, feel free to drop that in the chat and we'll see if we can come back around and help you out. In the meantime, I wanted to go back to another comment. One of the participants mentioned, I think sole proprietor is working, but wonder about an LLC. If you feel comfortable, go ahead and drop in what kind of questions you're having or what you'd like to learn more about. If there's anything we can do to help you kind of, clarify that.
As we wait for that, I was kind of curious to go back to the doing business as. Are there benefits to filing the paperwork for doing business as?
As I understand it, and Daniel, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it basically just allows you to collect payments under a business name if you don't already have a business filed with the state. So if you're a sole proprietor and you just started a company and you want to call it Gizmos Incorporated or something, you can accept payments under Gizmos Incorporated rather than Bridget Manley.
Right.
Am I correct in that?
Yeah, there is a consideration for that. You're not really allowed to use those suffixes like incorporated or LLC unless you are that type of business.
Okay.
But like, yeah, if you wanted to say gizmos are us or something like that, which is very, I think, on the spirit of what you were saying,
Mhm.
that you could be registered and officially, advertise as gizmos are us. Somebody could write you a check as gizmos are us. You could be publicly known as that particular entity, and still be a sole proprietor.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Okay. Excellent. Going back to the question from earlier, the person who asked that question responded about, LLC versus sole proprietor, wrote liability. Mainly, I carry liability mainly. I carry $1 million insurance. So it sounds like the question is whether or not you should scale up to an LLC just to provide more liability protection. What do you think, Dan?
Well, okay. So it's definitely that particular. It's your decision as to how you feel you'd like to go with that. If your sole proprietorship is running fine and you're currently able to do business under a business name, something that you've selected, and everything is easy to maintain, administratively, it may be better to stay registered as a sole proprietor, just because everything you do with taxes at the end of the year is as far as personally, is just send in your 1040, and you don't have to fill out any special tax forms or anything like that. I can tell you that Bridget and I, with our LLC, we've been seeing just in the past few years that the tax forms that we have to fill out are just insane, especially with the what is it called, the Paperwork Reduction Act or something like that. What they've done to reduce paperwork is put every single question on a different page now, so that you have to send in like the smallest number of questions per page. I'm just being facetious, but it is quite a bit more difficult to finish your taxes even at the LLC level, whereas sole proprietor, you fill out your 1040, you pay your self-employment tax. I see that you had talked about that you carry $1 million liability, which is probably more than enough to protect you personally. So even if somebody did put, your personal name on a liability case of some sort, you would have enough insurance to back that, even in the worst possible case. So it's definitely your decision, though. And okay, so Luthi says, I like being a sole proprietor. So yeah, it's definitely up to you, especially if you're well established. You may be set. If you need partners, though, if you need to bring some partners on board with you, then LLC is probably your next stop.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Yeah. Yeah. Well, good. And I'm glad that that was helpful. Sometimes it's just helpful to, talk it out and, discuss the different pros and cons and decide what's going to work best for you. So yeah, I'm glad that was helpful. Excellent. Any other questions or thoughts or challenges you're facing as you're trying to decide what type of business, what classification of business you'd like to start? All right. Well, I think,
I was wondering, though, if I was able to fully answer Leanne's question
okay. And that was,
about the international partners.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. Leanne, if you have any other thoughts or questions.
Okay, thanks, Leanne.
Okay. Yeah. She said, I believe so. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Well, I think we answered all the questions in the universe. Probably not, but
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for participating today. Thanks for sharing your ideas and thoughts. It makes it a lot more fun for us and hopefully a lot more valuable for you. So with that, I think I'll hand it back to you, Mandy.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you both so much for this information. I think that this is very, very helpful. And working with small business owners, this is something that we encounter quite often. So we really appreciate you guys taking the time to share this information with us today. And thank all of you also for being here. I've dropped in the chat. We have another upcoming webinar next Tuesday with both Bridget and Daniel again. We're going to be discussing getting started with open source software. So please, please, please check us out. You can follow that link to register for that. It will be next Tuesday, August 2nd at the same time, 11 a.m. And so we're looking forward to having you guys back with us for that as well. And then also we have a short survey that will be sent to you once this concludes. If you wouldn't mind taking some time to fill that out as well, that really helps us to provide content that is helpful to everyone. So if you'll please check that out as well. Otherwise, thank you everyone for attending today, and we really appreciate your time, and we're looking forward to seeing everyone back here next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.